Hello, everybody. My name is Ekaterina, or Katrina, as everyone calls me, O'Neill, and I'm very grateful for being given the opportunity to share with you a little bit about the experiences of twice exceptional Russophone families in the United States. The topic is actually very personal to me. The thing is, I was born in the former Soviet Union and lived there until its collapse in 1991. Because my family lived in Kiev, we became Ukrainian citizens and continued living in Ukraine until 1996. At that point, my whole family moved to the United States, and we've been living there ever since. Next year, it's going to be 30 years. Last 20 years, I spent in a completely different field, the field of cybersecurity. I was a distinguished technologist looking for vulnerabilities in the code. However, it's been almost a year since I quit my job and transitioned into the field of cognitive diversity in education. And the reason I did that is because of these two wonderful individuals in this picture, my two kids. Both of them are twice exceptional. And further, my husband and I, my husband, who is an American, decided to raise them bilingual and bicultural as well. So they're both bilingual, bicultural, and twice exceptional. While I was raising my kids, I ran into a number of challenges. Not just because we were trying to raise them bilingual and bicultural, even though that's very hard and this would be a topic for a different discussion, but also because we realized that they were twice exceptional. And I was trying to figure out why we ran into so many challenges. And I decided for myself that there were two main origins of the challenges. One was the misconception within the Russophone community about giftedness, twice exceptionality, neurodiversity, and learning differences. And on the other hand, misconceptions about cultural diversity within the educator and specialist community. So specifically, the misconceptions within the Russophone community about giftedness, twice exceptionality, and neurodiversity, I think, came from several factors. And among them are, first of all, the fact that there was a lack of formal gifted education system in the former Soviet Union and in the Russian Federation. Yes, there were specialized schools, there were specialized programs, but it was all driven, identification was driven by parents, and there was no formal support. Further, I learned not too long ago that there was prohibition of the usage of psychological testing in the former Soviet Union, and that obviously contributed to the fact that nobody was tested. Nobody was tested for either giftedness or learning differences, and in fact, I didn't know anything about learning differences, neurodiversity, twice exceptionality, giftedness, until I, learned about it because of my kids. There was also no comprehensive theory of giftedness developed by any of the Russophone scholars. On the contrary, there's an abundance of conceptions of giftedness developed by non-Russophone scholars. And I think that this abundance actually contributes to the confusion about what giftedness is all about within the Russophone community. In terms of misconceptions about cultural diversity within the educator and specialist community, here are some. So the most prominent one is this assumption that the culturally diverse learners are homogeneous, meaning that, they're all culturally diverse, so they probably have the same needs, and so we need to support them in the same exact way. But that's actually not true at all, because especially if we're talking about the United States, which is the focus of this discussion, English language learners come to the United States from all over the world, from all the different cultures. And different cultures have different views of the world, different outlooks on life, different values. They see giftedness differently. They value wisdom differently. And so obviously their needs are going to be different as well. There's another assumption that immigrant children are proficient in the native language, but that's not always the case. A lot depends on when they came to the United States. For example, I came to the United States when I was 16, so I was quite proficient in the language. I consider it my first language. However, my kids were born in the United States, and for them, the challenge is the opposite. For me, the challenge was English. For them, the challenge is Russian. And so it's challenging to maintain the language, even though they're proficient in it. But there's all these different degrees in between as well. Some kids are able to understand the language. Some kids are able to understand and speak the language. Some kids are able to understand, speak, and read in the language, and yet others are able to understand, speak, read, and write in Russian. So there's all these different degrees of proficiency. Finally, another common misconception, is the fact that before you can apply for gifted services, you have to be fluent in English. And that's obviously not the case, in the sense that if a child is gifted, they're gifted no matter what language they speak. And so their needs in terms of their giftedness, their strengths, their talents need to be supported no matter what language they speak. And so in a sense, it became my mission, my goal, to become this bridge between the two communities in the United States, the Russophone and the educator. So on the one hand, I want to explore experiences and the needs of Russophone to exceptional families and make educators aware of those needs so they can figure out how to best support Russophone to exceptional families. On the other hand, I want to bring awareness of giftedness, to exceptionality, neurodiversity, and learning differences to the Russophone community. Before I jump ahead in the talk, I want to address one thing. You might be wondering why I use the term Russophone instead of Russian. Well, it's a little bit tricky, especially nowadays, and so I decided to use some visuals. So here's a map of the former Soviet Union from 1984. Soviet Union consisted of 15 different republics. The largest was the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, which is in yellow on this map. And this republic became what is known now as Russian Federation. However, all the other republics of Soviet Union became also independent states, and so that's how we have Ukraine and Kazakhstan and Lithuania and Latvia and all the others. Because they were all part of former Soviet Union, they all were required to speak Russian. So majority of population in all of these republics speak Russian, even though they have their own native languages and their own ethnic languages and now their own state languages. In fact, former Soviet Union had a lot of impact on other Eastern European countries, such as Poland, for example, where I know a lot of people were required to study Russian. And so that's why I use the term Russophone to refer to all of those people who are able to speak Russian, not just the Russian people from Russian Federation, because all of the others are also able to speak Russian. I also want to address why I decided to focus on this very niche population within the United States. Apart from the obvious fact that I'm personally invested in the topic, there are a couple of other factors. One is that I was unable to find any relevant studies of Russophone to exceptional families. If you know of any studies, please contact me. I would love to hear from you. Also, because we're talking about this topic within the context of the United States, I decided to only focus on the United States because the laws and attitudes towards giftedness and education are different in other countries. Russian in the United States is considered one of the top 10 languages spoken by English language learners at school, and also is on the list of critical languages of strategic importance to U.S. national security and global economy. Further, as of 2019, there were 1 million Russophone persons in the United States, which is a 37% increase even within the previous 20 years. And I argue that more and more are going to be coming. At least they were coming until August 31st, 2024, because at that point there were more than 500,000 of Ukrainians entering the United States on humanitarian parole because of the Russo-Ukrainian conflict. So you can see that there are quite a few Russophone people residing in the United States, and I'm sure that you're familiar with some of the eminent ones that you can see on this picture. You might not realize that they are Russophone, but they are. In fact, they're all first-generation immigrants to the United States. And among them are famous composers, writers, athletes, ballet dancers and actors, chess players, innovators, and entrepreneurs. Interestingly, most of the Russophone immigrants to the United States, except for potentially the first wave of immigration that happened in the 18th century, where the settlers arrived to Alaska and California to explore the New World, came to the United States because they were escaping some sort of economic or political turmoil in their country of origin, whether it was famine and poverty, or consequences of the Russian Revolution of 1917, or post-World War II chaos, or anti-Semitism and political persecution in Soviet Russia, or post-Soviet Union collapse, hyperinflation and economic crisis, financial crash of 1998, or finally Russo-Ukrainian conflict that began in 2014. As I was reflecting on the challenges that I ran into while raising my kids, I started wondering whether other members of the Russophone community in the United States had similar challenges, or maybe they had different experiences. And so in preparation for my larger study that I'm going to run for my dissertation, last year I decided to run a much smaller pilot study, an online survey, where I wanted to ask Russophone community members about their experiences, about the challenges and the benefits of being twice exceptional and bilingual and bicultural. And here's some statistics around this study. First of all, I collected 84 signatures and 64 responses, which makes response rate about 76%. 62 of those responses were fully qualified. 2 people said that they don't speak Russian, and so they were disqualified. And as you can see from this graph, my sample, unfortunately, was very, very non-random and highly skewed to California. And that's because I live in California and I know a lot of Russian-speaking people in California, and so a lot of them responded to my survey. However, I had respondents from other states as well. The first several questions were targeted to all members of the Russophone community, not just West exceptional members, because I wanted to see how much they know about neurodiversity, giftedness, learning differences, and twice exceptionality. And you can see from these numbers that most people knew what giftedness was about, fewer people knew what learning differences was about, even fewer knew about neurodiversity, and only about 56-57% knew what twice exceptionality was about. And out of these 62 respondents, 26 responded positively to my question of whether there's anybody in their family who's twice exceptional. The rest of the questions of my study were targeting twice exceptional Russophone families, and so I only got 26 responses to those questions. My first question to them was about the nature of their learning differences. I believe there were only 5 participants who responded with just one learning difference. Everybody else checked off several boxes. And as you can see from this graph, number 1 learning difference was anxiety, closely followed by ADHD, ASD, depression, dyslexia, and several others. My next question was about the challenges that they've experienced because of being twice exceptional, bilingual, and bicultural. And as you can tell from this graph, the overwhelming number 1 challenge that everybody had was the feeling of not fitting in, because they were not fitting in, not just because they were gifted, not just because they had learning differences, but also because they were culturally diverse. In second place, we have underappreciated second language vocabulary and being viewed as less smart. And then closely followed by not being provided special education services and not being identified for gifted services, which is extremely common in the twice exceptional community. And then we have cultural bias in assessments. Pressure to stop investing in second language was another one. Passed over for promotion. 4 participants responded this way. 3 responded with hard time helping kids with schoolwork because schoolwork was in English. 2 participants mentioned that they were fired from work because they were twice exceptional and bilingual and bicultural. And 1 person mentioned that they had difficulty receiving mental health services because of cultural differences. However, I also wanted to see whether my participants saw any benefits to being twice exceptional, bilingual, and bicultural. And they did. The 2 most commonly checked responses were ability to communicate with an older generation, because usually older generations don't speak English very well or don't speak English at all. And also, and I think it's extremely important, being more open towards and accepting of other cultures and differences. This only speaks for how important it is to embrace diversity of all kinds. Then we have ability to communicate abroad, because if you're going back to visit your country of origin, then you have no problem communicating. Ability to think like an outsider, again, because you're coming from a different culture, you look at things differently and you bring new, fresh perspective. Then ability to acquire additional languages more easily was mentioned. Also, bringing own customs, traditions into the environment was another one. And finally, just being appreciated for being multicultural. My last question was open-ended, and I wanted to ask my participants for suggestions on how to better support their needs. The responses I got, I split into 2 sections, school-related and not school-related. And here are some of the themes that came out of that data. First of all, in terms of school-related, more giftedness and neurodiversity resources and training for teachers, as well as to specialists on staff at schools, colleges, and universities. Also, my participants mentioned that having access to school personnel who can communicate with the child and parents in their native language would be important. And here I want to emphasize that that person needs to be not just a regular translator from one language to another, but also should be able to understand the concepts in giftedness, twice exceptionality, neurodiversity, and learning differences. Flexibility in schooling environment that allows to meet kids where they're at, and also schooling with both languages included, or as many languages the child speaks, and native language clubs. In terms of non-school related, the number 1 suggestion that was mentioned was having access to assessors who can conduct neuropsychological evaluations in the child's native language. I, for example, know of only 1 psychologist who can evaluate the Russian-speaking kids, and that's obviously not enough. Acceptance of non-white Russian-speaking individuals. This is quite important to remember. As I showed you on that map, Russia is a huge country with lots of nationalities and lots of ethnicities, and not everybody looks white, and it's good to keep that in mind. More information on neurodiversity available in Russian, and this is something that I'm trying to contribute currently, because I have a blog where I talk about our neurodiverse and twice exceptional family life in Russian. I'm also translated into Ukrainian. I'm trying to write articles in Russian. Free and available psychological support services for Cherokee families. More resources and support in career transition in research and development. And finally, separation of politics and culture, which unfortunately came up because of this conflict between Russia and Ukraine that's been ongoing. If you're curious what research I based my talk, my pilot study, and my dissertation proposal on, here are some of the references. My dissertation proposal has a lot more. And of course, I want to thank you all for listening. If you have any interest in this topic, please reach out. If you know of any studies about Russophone twice exceptional families, please reach out. And thank you so much.